Let us begin our journey not in the halls of power, but in the quiet, wind-swept heart of America. The story of Ronald Wilson Reagan is first and foremost a story of the prairie, of small-town values, and of a family whose fortunes rose and fell with the tides of a young nation's economy. He was born on a cold February day in 1911 in an apartment above a small bank building in Tampico, Illinois. His father, John Edward Reagan, was a man of Irish Catholic descent, a shoe salesman by trade, whose dreams were often larger than his wallet. Jack, as he was known, possessed a gift for storytelling and a tragic fondness for drink, traits that would cast long shadows and teach early lessons about resilience. His mother, Nellie Wilson Reagan, was the steadying counterpoint, a gentle, devout woman of the Disciples of Christ faith who believed fiercely in the power of kindness, hard work, and the inherent goodness of people. It was from her that young Ronald, nicknamed Dutch by his father for his sturdy infant appearance, learned to read aloud, to perform in church plays, and to see the world not as a harsh place, but as one filled with possibility and neighborly compassion. The Reagan family was perennially on the move, a nomadic unit chasing stability from one Illinois town to the next, Tampico to Chicago, to Galesburg to Monmouth. Each move was a hopeful fresh start, often prompted by Jack's search for a better sales territory or a chance to escape a stumble. This itinerant childhood, however, planted in Dutch a deep and abiding love for the constants he could find, the open fields, the main streets where shopkeepers knew your name, and the profound sense of community that sustained families through hard winters and economic drought. In Dixon, where the family finally settled when Ronald was 9, he found his true hometown. The Rock River flowed peacefully through it, and its banks became his sanctuary. He would spend countless hours there, swimming, exploring, and working as a lifeguard at Lowell Park, a role that suited his athletic build and his developing sense of responsibility. Over 7 summers, he recorded saving 77 lives, a number he recalled with quiet pride, a tangible testament to his ability to act decisively and protect others. Life in Dixon was not without its sharp hardships. The family's financial struggles came to a head during the Prohibition era when Jack lost his job at a Dixon shoe store. The only work he could find was in a neighboring town, forcing him to live away from his family during the week. Then, a new opportunity arose, one that would sear itself into Ronald's memory. Jack secured a partnership to manage a shoe store back in Dixon, but to do so, the family had to move into an apartment above the store. The catch was that the building also housed a speakeasy and a legal bar. For Nellie, a fervent temperance advocate, and for the boys, this was a source of deep shame and conflict. Yet, they endured. This experience, living literally above the temptation that so plagued his father, taught Ronald about the complexities of human frailty and the strength required to maintain one's dignity in the face of societal judgment. It solidified his aversion to alcohol and instilled a personal discipline he would carry for life. High school in Dixon revealed the young man he was becoming. He was not a natural scholar, but he thrived in activities that involved communication and leadership. He played football, acted in school plays, and served as president of the student body. His gift for narrative, honed by reading sports broadcasts from the newspaper to his blind aunt, began to flourish. He envisioned a life beyond the Illinois horizon, perhaps in sports or entertainment, but the practicalities of his family's means pointed toward a local education. He enrolled at Eureka College, a small Disciples of Christ-affiliated school, working a series of jobs to pay his way. There, he majored in economics and sociology, but his true education continued outside the classroom. He played football, joined the drama club, and was swept up in a student protest against proposed cutbacks by the college president. His eloquence led his peers to choose him to present their grievances, a successful negotiation that marked his first foray into persuasive oratory on a public stage. Graduation in 1932 coincided with the deepest despair of the Great Depression. Jobs were scarce ghosts. For a charismatic, handsome young man with a sociology degree and a head full of dreams, The prospects in the Midwest seemed to shrink by the day. He took what work he could find, including a stint as a radio announcer for the Chicago Cubs baseball games. This was not glamorous work. It involved vividly describing games recreated from telegraph reports in a small studio, requiring immense creativity and a compelling voice to make the static-filled plays come alive for listeners. Yet, it was here, in this humble booth, that he began to understand the intimate power of the spoken word entering a family's home. He wasn't just announcing games. He was weaving stories of hope and excitement, providing a momentary escape from the bleakness outside. This skill, this connection forged through the airwaves, would become the unexpected runway for a much larger journey. So, from the hardscrabble soil of Illinois, a particular American character was forged. It was a character shaped by his mother's optimistic faith, tempered by his father's struggles, anchored by the solid values of a small community, and polished on the banks of the Rock River. The future president's core beliefs in individualism, in the power of optimistic narrative, in the fundamental decency of ordinary people, and in America as a shining city upon a hill, were not political theories acquired later in life. They were lived experiences absorbed in the Heartland. They were the lessons of Dixon, that hard work brings reward, that community offers support, that individuals can overcome great obstacles, and that a clear, confident voice can guide and inspire. As he would later say, his life truly began in Dixon. All that followed, the microphone, the silver screen, the governor's mansion, the White House, was, in his mind, an extension of the values nurtured in those quiet, formative years under the vast Illinois sky. As the Great Depression tightened its grip on America, a young Ronald Reagan left the familiar landscapes of Illinois, carrying his sociology degree and a relentless optimism, but few concrete prospects. His first professional footing was found not on a stage or a political platform, but in the intimate, electrically charged space of the radio booth. It was an era when radio was the central nervous system of the nation, a magical box that brought news, entertainment, and companionship into millions of living rooms. For Reagan, it became his academy, teaching him the subtle arts of mass communication. His initial break came at WOC in Davenport, Iowa, a small station where his audition consisted of improvising a dramatic commentary on a fictional football game. His voice, clear, warm, and reassuringly Midwestern, won him the job. Soon, he moved to its sister station, Who in Des Moines, a Clear Channel powerhouse that reached much of the nation. Here, he was tasked with a unique challenge, announcing Chicago Cubs baseball games. The catch was that Who could not afford to send him to Chicago. He would be in a studio hundreds of miles away. This is where the art of recreation was born, a discipline that would profoundly shape his future. A telegraph operator in Wrigley Field would tap out a brief code for each play, S1C for a strike, B for a ball, GB for a ground ball. From these sparse, clinical notations, Reagan had to conjure an entire world. With only the crackle of the wire service for company, he would lean into the microphone and begin to paint a picture. The sun is high over Wrigley Field, he might say, and a slight breeze is blowing in from left field. Gabby Hartnett settles behind the plate, gives the sign. The pitcher nods, goes into his windup. The sound effects man would provide the crack of a bat for a hit or the thump of a ball into a mitt for a strikeout. Reagan's job was to fill every second with vivid, believable narrative, to describe the sweat on a brow, the tension in the crowd, the arc of a fly ball against a painted blue sky. He was not merely an announcer. He was a storyteller, a weaver of realities, learning to build suspense, convey emotion, and maintain a seamless flow of words that captivated an invisible audience. For 5 years, this was his world. He became one of the most popular sportscasters in the Midwest, his voice a trusted companion to farmers in their fields and families on their front porches. The work required immense concentration, quick thinking, and an unwavering belief in the story he was telling. If the telegraph wire went dead, a common occurrence, he had to improvise, inventing foul balls and pitchers' duels until the signal returned, a feat of pure narrative endurance. This daily exercise honed his timing, his pacing, and his innate sense for what resonated with an audience. He learned to project sincerity, to make each listener feel as if he were speaking directly to them, sharing a secret excitement. The radio booth was a crucible that forged his public persona, the friendly, confident, plain-spoken communicator who could simplify complexity and make the distant feel immediate. His life in Des Moines was one of growing comfort and local celebrity. He enjoyed the social life, dated, and became deeply involved in the interests of his listeners, even helping to organize strikes and advocate for better conditions for sportscasters. The medium itself was also his window onto a larger, more troubling world. As the 1930s wore on, the news breaks between his sports broadcasts carried increasingly alarming reports from Europe, the rise of Adolf Hitler, the march of fascism, the drums of war. Reagan, like many Americans, listened with growing unease. His natural patriotism and the anti-totalitarian sentiments bred in his small-town upbringing found a focus. He began to read more deeply on political matters, his interest moving beyond the sports page. The radio had taught him the power of ideas transmitted through the air. Now he started to consider what ideas were worth transmitting. The pivotal moment came during a 1937 spring training trip to California with the Cubs. The Who broadcaster always traveled with the team for this annual ritual, and for Reagan, the sun-drenched fields of Catalina Island and the glamour of Los Angeles were a revelation. Here, he made a fateful connection. Using his growing network of contacts, he arranged for a screen test at Warner Brothers' studio. The studio executives were impressed. They saw not just a handsome face and athletic physique, but a natural ease in front of the camera, a quality undoubtedly refined by years of performing for the unseen audience of the radio. The voice they heard was already trained, already accustomed to conveying emotion and command without visual aid. Warner Brothers offered him a 7-year contract. It was an offer that represented the pinnacle of aspiration for a small-town boy from Illinois, a ticket to Hollywood. The decision to leave radio was not easy. He was successful, respected, and secure in a profession he loved. Yet, the lure of the new medium of film, with its vast potential, was irresistible. In 1937, he said goodbye to Des Moines and drove west. The skills he packed in his suitcase, however, were not from a drama school, but from the radio studio. He brought with him an understanding of narrative economy, an ear for the conversational tone, and a deep-seated knowledge of how to connect with an audience he could not see. The microphone had been his first great teacher. It gave him his career, but more importantly, it gave him his instrument. As he would later reflect, everything in politics is communication. And no president before him had served such a thorough, daily apprenticeship in the art of communicating to a nation of listeners, of building a shared reality one carefully chosen word at a time. The voice from the Iowa airwaves was heading toward a much larger stage. The journey from the radio booth in Des Moines to the soundstages of Warner Brothers was a leap across a cultural chasm. When Ronald Reagan arrived in Hollywood in 1937, he entered a world of manufactured glamour, fierce competition, and the powerful glare of the cinematic sun. His first screen test had shown promise, and Warner Brothers, always in need of reliable, all-American leading men, saw in him a potential successor to their stable of stars. His early roles were modest, often typecast as the wholesome, clean-cut reporter or the genial best friend. His first major film, Love Is on the Air, was a fitting beginning. He played a brash radio announcer, essentially portraying a slightly dramatized version of himself. The studio system of the Golden Age was a factory, and Reagan became one of its dependable products, appearing in over 50 films throughout the 1940s and early 1950s. While he never achieved the stratospheric fame of a Clark Gable or a James Stewart, he developed into a popular and bankable star, known for his likability and earnest charm. His most celebrated role came in 1940 with Knute Rockne, All-American, where he played the legendary Notre Dame football player George Gipp. In one pivotal scene, on his deathbed, Gipp whispers to his coach, "Someday, when the team is up against it, tell them to go out there and win one for the Gipper." The line, delivered with a poignant mix of strength and frailty, entered the American lexicon. Though a small part, it cemented an image of Reagan as a repository of heartfelt patriotism and inspirational grit. That image was further solidified in 1942's King's Row, a dark melodrama where he played a small-town playboy, Drake McHugh, who wakes from surgery to find his legs amputated. His agonized cry, "Where's the rest of me?" became the title of his 1965 autobiography and a metaphor for a search for identity. The performance showcased a dramatic range that critics acknowledged, proving he was more than just a handsome face. Hollywood was more than a career, it was a comprehensive education. It taught him about the power of image, the importance of lighting and camera angles, and the meticulous craft of building a persona. On set, he observed how directors framed a scene to convey a specific emotion and how editors could shape narrative in the cutting room. These were not merely artistic lessons, they were lessons in perception management. He also learned the collaborative nature of large-scale production, akin to running a small city, an experience that would later inform his executive style. Furthermore, the relentless schedule of filmmaking, the early calls, the memorization of lines, the need to perform on demand, instilled a profound professional discipline. The camera, like the radio microphone, demanded consistency and control. This period was also one of profound personal change and political awakening. In 1940, he married actress Jane Wyman, and they had 2 children, Maureen and an adopted son, Michael. Their life seemed a picture of Hollywood bliss, but the marriage would ultimately dissolve in 1948, a painful private chapter amid public success. His political views during this time began a significant transformation. Initially, he was a New Deal Democrat, a staunch supporter of Franklin Roosevelt and the labor movement. His involvement in Hollywood deepened this inclination. He became an active member and eventually a board member of the Screen Actors Guild, SAG, the actors' union. He led SAG through tumultuous times, navigating complex labor disputes and confronting issues of communism within the industry. It was during these bitter fights that his worldview began to shift. The crucible of SAG leadership and the post-World War II Red Scare changed him. He testified before the House Un-American Activities Committee as a friendly witness, detailing his concerns about communist influence in the Union. Through his negotiations with studio executives, he began to see the government and overweening regulation as potential threats to freedom, rather than its protectors. His conversations with conservative friends and his own reading moved him steadily to the right. By the end of his film career in the early 1950s, the transformation was nearly complete. The liberal union man was becoming a conservative spokesman. Hollywood had given him fame, a platform, and a unique set of skills, but it had also been the arena where his core political convictions were forged in the fires of ideological conflict. He left active filmmaking as a different man than the eager young sportscaster who had arrived 15 years prior, politically seasoned, media-savvy, and ready for a new kind of performance. For all the glitter and artifice of Hollywood, Ronald Reagan's soul consistently yearned for a simpler, more tangible reality. He found this sanctuary not on a soundstage, but on horseback, under the vast, open sky of the American West. This profound connection to the land culminated in Rancho del Cielo, his ranch in the sky, a 688-acre retreat nestled in the Santa Ynez Mountains above Santa Barbara. He purchased the property in 1974, long before his presidency, with his second wife, Nancy, whom he had married in 1952. The ranch was not a luxurious estate, but a modest, weathered adobe house built in 1872, with creaky floors, a leaking roof, and no central heating. For Reagan, its imperfections were its perfections. It was a project, a place of physical labor and personal renewal, far removed from the pressures of public life. Rancho del Cielo was more than a vacation home, it was a physical manifestation of his identity and values. Here, he was not an actor or a politician, but a rancher. He would rise early, don his well-worn jeans, boots, and a Stetson hat, and spend his days engaged in hard, honest work. He cleared brush with a chainsaw, split logs for the fireplace, repaired fences, and built a pond. He and Nancy would ride their horses, El Alamein and No Strings, for hours along the winding trails, through groves of oak and sycamore, breathing in the sage-scented air. The ranch was where he could think, free from the cacophony of advisors and telephones. He would often take a pad of paper and a pencil on his rides, dismounting to jot down thoughts for a speech or simply reflect on the landscape before him. The solitude and the rhythm of manual labor provided a crucial counterbalance to the abstract, high-stakes world of governance. During his presidency, Rancho del Cielo became the Western White House and a powerful symbol. World leaders were not received in its cramped living room by accident. When he hosted Soviet Premier Mikhail Gorbachev's wife, Raisa, for a visit in 1991, after leaving office, or when he hosted Queen Elizabeth II for a picnic lunch in 1983, he was making a deliberate statement. He was showing them the America he loved and governed, not the imperial capital of Washington, but the rugged, independent, self-reliant heart of the frontier. The imagery was potent. A world leader chopping wood or mending a gate spoke of humility, connection to the earth, and a rejection of imperial pomp. Photographs of him on horseback, surveying his domain, reinforced the narrative of the cowboy president, a guardian of traditional values and wide-open spaces. The ranch was also the setting for his most personal and poignant moments. It was here that he and Nancy found their deepest peace, a partnership that was the emotional center of his life. After the attempt on his life in 1981, it was to Rancho del Cielo that he retreated to convalesce. The clean mountain air and the familiar routines of ranch life were integral to his remarkable physical and mental recovery. He would sit on the porch, watching the hawks circle, his strength returning with each passing day. In his post-presidential years, as the shadows of Alzheimer's disease began to gather, the ranch remained his anchor. It was the last place he visited publicly, a final communion with the land he cherished. When the disease finally made its management too difficult, the decision to sell the ranch was one of the most heart-wrenching of Nancy's life. Thus, Rancho del Cielo stands as a silent but essential character in the Reagan story. It was his workshop, his retreat, his symbol, and his home. The dirt on his boots, the smell of saddle leather, the ache of a day's good work, these were not photo opportunities, but genuine necessities. They connected him to the mythic American West of individualism and perseverance, a myth he both believed in and embodied. In an age of increasing complexity and digital abstraction, the ranch was a testament to the enduring human need for tangible creation and quiet space. It reminded him, and through him the nation, of a foundational truth, that strength is often drawn not from boardrooms or legislative chambers, but from the quiet land, from simple labor, and from the unbroken horizon. The ranch in the sky was, in every sense, his spiritual homestead. The path from the soundstage to the State House was not a straight line, but a gradual, deliberate pivot shaped by circumstance and conviction. By the early 1950s, Ronald Reagan's film career was waning, but his voice was finding a new and powerful audience. His transformation from New Deal Democrat to conservative standard-bearer found its perfect medium in television and public speaking. In 1954, he became the host and occasional performer for General Electric Theater, a popular weekly drama series. This role came with an unusual requirement. As GE's corporate ambassador, he was expected to tour the company's plants across the country, giving speeches to employees. For 8 years, he honed his message on this circuit, speaking to factory workers, managers, and local chambers of commerce. He spoke of free enterprise, the dangers of big government, the creeping threat of communism, and the enduring promise of American individualism. Each speech was refined, each anecdote polished, in a process he called the speech. It was a compelling, optimistic critique of liberalism that resonated deeply with a growing segment of the American public. This period was his political boot camp. The GE tours took him into the heart of Middle America, far from the coastal elites. He listened to the concerns of small business owners and families, reinforcing his belief that Washington was out of touch. His television presence kept him in living rooms, his face familiar and trustworthy. The climax of this phase came on October 27, 1964, when he delivered a nationally televised speech on behalf of Republican presidential candidate Barry Goldwater. Titled A Time for Choosing, it was a masterpiece of political oratory. In clear, evocative language, he framed the election as a choice between individual freedom and a soulless, bureaucratic state. "You and I have a rendezvous with destiny," he declared. "We will preserve for our children this, the last best hope of man on earth, or we will sentence them to take the last step into 1,000 years of darkness." The speech was a sensation. It raised millions for the doomed Goldwater campaign and, more importantly, it anointed Reagan as the new, charismatic voice of American conservatism. The speech made him a political star overnight. Almost immediately, a group of wealthy California Republicans approached him about running for governor in 1966. The incumbent was the formidable Pat Brown, a liberal Democrat who had presided over a period of massive growth and corresponding problems, soaring taxes, campus unrest at the University of California, and racial tensions in cities like Watts. Reagan, the political novice, seemed an unlikely challenger. But he campaigned not as a politician, but as a citizen leader, an outsider promising to clean up the mess in Sacramento. He leveraged his communication skills brilliantly, disarming critics with humor and presenting complex issues in simple, moral terms. His campaign tapped into a deep well of voter frustration with crime, taxes, and what was seen as permissive social policies. To the astonishment of the political establishment, he defeated Brown by nearly 1 million votes. Skeptics expected the actor-governor to be a mere figurehead, reading lines written by others. They were mistaken. Reagan brought a CEO-like style to the governorship. He assembled a strong, loyal staff, delegated effectively, and focused on a few key principles: reducing the growth of government spending, reforming welfare, and taking a hard line on campus unrest. He faced immediate and fierce opposition from a Democratic-controlled legislature, leading to protracted battles. While he did not achieve all his goals, he actually signed the largest tax increase in California history to address a crippling deficit. He demonstrated a pragmatic flexibility that belied his ideological rhetoric. He learned the art of compromise, the need for data, and the realities of administrative management. He also showed steely resolve, most famously in 1969 when he sent in the National Guard to quell riots in Berkeley, declaring, "If it takes a bloodbath, let's get it over with." His 2 terms as governor, from 1967 to 1975, were a successful apprenticeship for the presidency. He left office with the state budget in surplus and his political philosophy tested in the fires of real governance. He had proven he could lead, make tough decisions, and survive in the political arena. More crucially, he had built a nationwide network of supporters and refined the optimistic, forward-looking message that would define his future. The garden path in Sacramento, lined with both roses and thorns, was the essential proving ground. It transformed him from a spokesman for a movement into a credible statesman, ready to step onto the national stage with experience, a clear vision, and the unwavering belief that America's brightest days were not behind her, but ahead. The transition from the California state capitol to the White House was the culmination of a long and unlikely journey. After a narrow defeat in the 1976 Republican primary to the incumbent Gerald Ford, Ronald Reagan seized the nomination in 1980, facing a nation mired in what he termed a crisis of confidence. With double-digit inflation, soaring interest rates, the humiliation of the Iran hostage crisis, and a pervasive sense of American decline abroad, his message of renewed strength and optimism found a powerful resonance. His landslide victory over President Jimmy Carter was not just a political change, but a profound shift in the nation's mood. On January 20, 1981, he stood on the west front of the Capitol and articulated his vision with crystalline clarity. In this present crisis, government is not the solution to our problem. Government is the problem. He promised to curb its size and influence, revive the economy through tax cuts, and restore American military and diplomatic strength. His inauguration day was also marked by a moment of breathtaking drama and grace, the simultaneous release of the 52 American hostages in Iran, a coincidence that many supporters saw as a providential beginning. The defining early event of his presidency occurred just 70 days later. On March 30th, 1981, as he left the Washington Hilton after a speech, a deranged young man, John Hinckley Jr., fired 6 shots from a .22 caliber pistol. One bullet ricocheted off the presidential limousine and struck Reagan under his left arm, piercing a lung and coming within an inch of his heart. In the chaos and confusion, his Secret Service detail rushed him to George Washington University Hospital. Critically wounded and struggling to breathe, he nonetheless displayed remarkable wit and courage. To his surgeons, he joked, "I hope you're all Republicans." To his wife Nancy, he quipped, "Honey, I forgot to duck." This display of grace under pressure captivated the nation and cemented a bond of affection with the public that would prove politically durable. His rapid and resilient recovery was seen as a metaphor for the national renewal he promised. The attempt on his life, rather than weakening his presidency, seemed to strengthen his resolve and his public mandate. The core of his domestic policy, soon dubbed Reaganomics, was a bold experiment in supply-side economics. It rested on 4 pillars: significant reductions in government spending, though this proved difficult in practice, deep cuts in marginal income tax rates, a stable monetary policy to curb inflation, and deregulation of industry. The Economic Recovery Tax Act of 1981 was its centerpiece. Critics warned it would explode the deficit and benefit only the wealthy. The initial results were painful. A severe recession gripped the country in 1982, with unemployment topping 10%. Yet, Reagan urged patience, asking the public to stay the course. By late 1983, the economy began a historic expansion. Inflation plummeted, interest rates fell, and millions of new jobs were created. Whether this boom was due to his policies, the natural business cycle, or the Federal Reserve's actions remains debated by economists. But to much of the public, it felt like a morning in America, a phrase immortalized in his triumphant 1984 re-election campaign. Life within the White House residence reflected his personal need for routine and sanctuary. His days began early, often with a review of the news brought to him on note cards. Despite the caricature of a disengaged president, he was deeply involved in setting broad strategy and the themes of his communication, trusting his staff to handle details. Evenings were fiercely protected for time with Nancy. They would often dine alone on trays in the private quarters, watching movies. His famous 9 to 5 work schedule was a source of ridicule for some, but for him, it was a discipline that preserved his energy and perspective. The residence at dusk was a place of calm, where the weight of the office could be temporarily set aside. He found solace in the small, familiar rituals, feeding the squirrels on the south lawn, writing in his diary, or simply looking out the window at the grounds he so revered. This ability to compartmentalize, to project an unflappable optimism, was perhaps his greatest political strength and a key to his personal endurance through 2 demanding terms. If Ronald Reagan's domestic legacy is defined by economic renewal, his foreign policy legacy is irrevocably tied to the peaceful end of the Cold War, a conclusion that seemed anything but inevitable when he took office. He entered the Oval Office with a stark, uncompromising view of the Soviet Union, which he famously labeled an evil empire in a 1983 speech to the National Association of Evangelicals. This was not mere rhetoric. It was a foundational belief that the conflict was a moral one between freedom and totalitarianism. He backed this conviction with a massive military buildup, including the controversial Strategic Defense Initiative, SDI, a proposed space-based missile defense system derided by critics as Star Wars. This arms race, he believed, would exploit the Soviet economy's fatal weaknesses and force the Kremlin to the negotiating table from a position of American strength. To allies and adversaries alike, his first-term posture seemed rigidly confrontational, heightening global tensions. Yet, within this hardline framework, a paradoxical openness existed. Reagan, the great anti-communist, was also a nuclear abolitionist at heart. He found the doctrine of mutual assured destruction mad, morally repugnant. He genuinely dreamed of a world free of nuclear weapons, seeing SDI not as a sword, but as a shield that could ultimately make such weapons impotent and obsolete. This deeply held ideal created a potential bridge. The key figure on the other side emerged in 1985, Mikhail Gorbachev, a new, younger Soviet leader who recognized his empire was stagnating economically and technologically. Gorbachev introduced the policies of glasnost, openness, and perestroika, restructuring. Reagan, after initial skepticism, saw in Gorbachev a different kind of communist, one he could potentially do business with. Their first summit in Geneva in November 1985 was a breakthrough in atmosphere, if not in substance. The two men, who had previously traded only harsh accusations, spent hours in private conversation by a fireside. They found a surprising personal connection, a recognition of shared humanity beyond ideology. This rapport was crucial. The following year, the Reykjavik summit in Iceland stunned the world. In a series of intense, unstructured negotiations, the two leaders came breathtakingly close to an agreement to eliminate all their nuclear arsenals. The deal ultimately foundered on Reagan's refusal to limit SDI research to the laboratory. While deemed a failure at the time, Reykjavik revealed the extraordinary scope of what was now possible. It demonstrated that both leaders were serious about drastic arms reduction, a thought unimaginable just years before. The thaw accelerated dramatically. In June 1987, Reagan stood at the Brandenburg Gate in West Berlin, a city long divided by the concrete symbol of the Iron Curtain. In a speech crafted to challenge Gorbachev directly, he issued his most famous line, "Mr. Gorbachev, open this gate. Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall." Advisors had urged him to remove the provocative line, fearing it would undermine diplomacy. Reagan insisted it stay. It was a bold declaration of the outcome he desired. Later that year, the two leaders signed the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces (INF) Treaty in Washington, a historic agreement that eliminated an entire class of nuclear weapons for the first time. The sight of the American president and the Soviet General Secretary signing agreements and joking together marked a seismic shift in the global order. Reagan left office in January 1989, with the wall still standing and the Soviet Union still intact. Yet, the ice had been broken. The pressure of the arms race, the ideological clarity of Reagan's challenge, and Gorbachev's revolutionary reforms had set forces in motion that could not be reversed. Just 11 months after Reagan departed, the Berlin Wall fell, not by tank fire, but by the hands of jubilant citizens. 2 years later, the Soviet Union itself dissolved. The Cold War ended not with a bang, but in a relatively peaceful transformation. History is a tapestry woven by countless threads, and credit for this epochal change is shared among many, including the people of Eastern Europe, the resilience of the West, and Gorbachev's courage. But Ronald Reagan's role was pivotal. He combined the strength to confront what he saw as evil with the vision to recognize and nurture change when it appeared. He moved from seeing the Soviet Union as a permanent, monolithic enemy to seeing its leader as a partner for peace. It was this journey, from the frost of evil empire to the warmth of the Geneva fireside, that helped guide the world from a long, tense twilight into a new and hopeful dawn. Every presidency has a final chapter, a return to private life where legacy is sorted and history begins its slow, patient work of judgment. For Ronald and Nancy Reagan, this chapter began on January 20th, 1989, as they boarded a plane to California, leaving the Washington stage after 8 consequential years. They settled not at Rancho del Cielo, which they still owned but visited less frequently, but in a spacious home in the Bel Air section of Los Angeles. Here, the rhythms of life slowed and shifted. The constant security detail remained, a permanent reminder of his station, but the frantic pace of the Oval Office was replaced by a quieter routine. He took walks, answered a fraction of the immense volume of mail, and enjoyed time with Nancy and their family. Yet, a man of his stature does not simply fade away. He builds an institution to steward his ideas. That institution was the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum, perched on a hilltop in Simi Valley, a site chosen for its resemblance to the rolling landscapes of his ranch. The library, dedicated in 1991, is more than a repository of papers and artifacts. It is a physical manifestation of his life and philosophy. Its sweeping vistas and airy design reflect his own optimism. Within its walls, one can trace the entire arc of the American century through his eyes: the radio scripts from Des Moines, the costumes from Hollywood films, the bullet-riddled limousine from the assassination attempt, the pieces of the Berlin Wall. It is a place of pilgrimage for supporters and a site of study for scholars. Reagan was deeply involved in its planning, viewing it not as a mausoleum, but as a living center for the promotion of the principles he held dear: individual liberty, limited government, and strong national defense. He envisioned it as a forum for debate and a training ground for future leaders, a role it continues to fulfill. The most poignant and public act of this post-presidential period was his own farewell to the American people. On November 5, 1994, he released a handwritten letter that began, "My fellow Americans, I have recently been told that I am one of the millions of Americans who will be afflicted with Alzheimer's disease." The letter was a masterpiece of dignity and grace. In clear, simple prose, he thanked the country for the honor of serving, expressed his and Nancy's love, and stated his intention to live the remainder of his years in the privacy of my family. He concluded with his enduring optimism: "I now begin the journey that will lead me into the sunset of my life. I know that for America there will always be a bright dawn ahead." The letter was a profound shock, a public embrace of a private tragedy that sparked a national conversation about the disease and demonstrated unwavering courage. The final decade was a long goodbye, conducted almost entirely away from public view. Nancy Reagan became his fierce protector, managing his care and guarding his privacy as the disease steadily eroded the memories of a lifetime, of the presidency, of Hollywood, of Dixon. The man who was defined by his words and his connection to people slowly retreated into silence. Yet, in that silence, the nation's affection for him seemed to grow. He became a symbol of a fading era, and his battle with Alzheimer's humanized him in a new and universal way. When he passed away on June 5, 2004, at the age of 93, the nation observed a state funeral of remarkable solemnity and scale. His body was flown to Washington to lie in state in the Capitol Rotunda, where over 100,000 people filed past his casket in quiet tribute. The service at the Washington National Cathedral was a gathering of world figures from the era he helped shape, including all living former presidents and former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher, who delivered a powerful eulogy via video. Finally, he was flown back to California, to the library at Simi Valley, where he was laid to rest on the hillside overlooking the Pacific Ocean. Today, the library in Bel Air's Sphere stands as his final monument. The sunset of his life was long and shadowed, but the legacy housed within those walls remains vibrant and contested. Historians continue to debate the full impact of his economic policies, his environmental record, the Iran-Contra affair, and his precise role in ending the Cold War. Supporters see a transformative figure who restored American confidence and won the defining struggle of the 20th century. Critics see a president who deepened economic inequality and sowed political divisions that endure. But perhaps beyond the politics, what endures is the archetype he embodied: the cheerful warrior, the communicator, the optimist who believed profoundly in the American story. The library, like his life, is not a closed book, but an open invitation to remember, to study, and to reflect on the complex journey of a man who, from the Illinois heartland to the global stage, never stopped believing it was morning in America.